Well, hello, I'm Dr. Marcus Earl, and this is Mind of a Therapist, and I am sitting across virtually from Katie K. And she has a business, Creative Healing. Equally important, and why we're basically here is because you've come with a book, You're on Fire,
Mhm.
and I'm excited to talk to you about this. I love the title, first and foremost. And then secondly is in listening to pieces of your story, realize that this is as a foundation with just who you are, what you've been through. And I think that brings a realness to what we do that I love talking to people about. So how about if you introduce yourself and let's go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus, for having me. And I think you hit on some important points already. So, as you said, my name is Katie K. May. I'm a therapist in Pennsylvania. I lead a team
Mhm.
in the greater Philadelphia area. We specialize in working with high risk teens and their parents. And as you said, this is a personal passion for me. So, it came from my lived experience as a teen who self harmed, who figured out my way through that, and also being the parent of a teenager with some mental health challenges. And somewhere along the way, getting my license to be a therapist and to support this population in shortening the struggle so that others don't have to figure it out along the way and they actually have the framework for feeling better with support.
So tell me, this journey of yours started with difficulty of your own, and you go into some of that, I think, in your book. Could you
Mhm.
just give an outline of what kind of set the foundation for you and understanding how rough it is to be a teen?
Yeah, I self harmed for the first time when I was 14. I was raised by a single father without a mom in the picture, and my dad was thrown into parenting. So, not only learning how to be the primary caretaker, which was not his role prior to my parents' divorce, but figuring out how to raise a teen daughter with big emotions, big reactions, and a lot of big feelings in our house that he was just not equipped for. So, I look back on it now thinking he did the best that he could with the skills and very low capacity he had for being a single working father. But in my book, I talk a lot about the skills that I teach parents now that I wish that he had. And so for me as a teen, I really internalized his lack of parenting skills and his lack of capacity as there being something wrong with me and that I was weird, bad, wrong, different for having these feelings and not knowing how to cope with them. And so self destructive behaviors became the way that I coped and got through a very difficult teen years.
Yeah, I think we all find ways of making it through our teenage years, and sometimes, I think it's in ways that are really profound. In other ways, it can be more subtle. That and I think that's what I'd want parents to hear is, you know, can look okay, sound okay, but can still be hiding some things that are a challenge for the young person.
Absolutely. It doesn't always have to come in these big, overt, crisis prone behaviors. And I would say for any behavior that we're observing in our child or our teen, that there's something underneath of that. That we want to decode that message, understand the underlying emotion, and really learn how to work with that rather than just respond to the behavior.
Yeah, so say more about that, the decode the underlying emotion. What are you talking about there?
Yeah. So when I look at any of these behaviors for anyone, but in particular because I work with teens, what I think about is that if you are someone who's biologically sensitive, if you are someone who experiences emotions in these really big and deep ways, as I did as a teen, then it often feels like you're on fire with your own emotions. It's big, it's overwhelming, it's all consuming, it's burning you up inside. And so when you think about it that way, it makes sense, or you can make sense of how someone's brain might try and make that fire go out quickly. And some of these go out quickly strategies are often impulsive and self destructive, self harm, suicidal thoughts and behaviors, or trying to make that fire a little less hot with things like numbing out with drugs and alcohol, binging, scrolling screens endlessly. So, a lot of these behaviors are because the underlying emotion is so big, so painful, so overwhelming that they're a way to either make it go away or make it a little less painful for the person experiencing it.
Yeah, and I think those are all ways we go about it, and then there also is performance.
Hmm.
So um, I kind of think all teens have big emotions.
Yeah.
It's
Developmentally,
not
I would say that's where their brain is, right? Their frontal lobe isn't formed. And so there's
right.
a lot going
There's just a
on.
lot going on. A lot's
Yeah.
changing. Having to sort with peers, having to sort out issues with parents, and you have school on top of that, you have your future ahead of you, you have your past behind you, you have friends that are doing all these different things. It's a fairly chaotic time, and now we've added on, social media and stuff. It's become very complicated. So I
Yeah.
think the Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say it's unrelenting, like you're saying. So, and I think about this a lot as someone who is self-employed, who sets my own schedule, and also watches my teenager and the many of the teens that I support have to go to school 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, and then they get home and they have homework and they have extracurriculars and they have attachment to their devices, which is this ongoing social expectation. So it's no wonder that they're tired, burnout, overwhelmed, lack capacity to manage their emotions. They're always on.
Yeah. So yes, I think that's the case where we all cope. And when I think about youth, and I think of my own adolescent years, I think all the teens that I worked with over time. So I think big emotions are part of our experience every time. Just some are better at hiding it than others. And in this day and age, when you're trying to sort out kind of managing your parents, managing school, managing friends, managing social media, it's completely overwhelming, I think, for most young people. And I would love it if parents would start from that presupposition that my young person's likely overwhelmed, even though they might not look like it.
Absolutely. I like to help parents find that line between what is typical and what is cause for concern. And it's one of the
Nice.
biggest questions that parents ask me because there is part of the developmentally typical teen years where they want more space from parents, or they might be a little bit more moody
Yeah.
and irritable. And that doesn't mean that they're depressed or anxious or they're secretly self harming or anything like that. And so, what I typically help parents uncover is what is the duration, intensity, and frequency of these concerns that you have. So, if your teen is spending time
Mm.
in their room, if your teen is a little bit moody or irritable, is it happening once in a while or is it a sustained period? Usually, I'll say over like 2 weeks, where you're noticing this disruption in their daily routine or a difference in their mood or presentation, because I want to create awareness for parents, like you're saying, of what's happening, and let's not ignore the signs if they are struggling with their emotions or feeling overwhelmed. But I also don't want to create a hypervigilance that every small change in affect means that something is wrong under the surface.
Yeah, then you get a young person, "What is wrong with you, mom or dad? You're
Right.
just in things
Right.
all the time."
We're just
So the
reacting to everything.
but now you're speaking to the difficulty it is of being a parent,
Sure.
having this balance of being interested versus allowing the young person to have space. So just talk more. How do you help parents find that sweet spot, if you will?
One of the things that I have found over the years of helping parents and also being a parent is that there is such a transactional element of it. So every time
Mm,
your child changes into a new stage of development, it forces you to change into a new kind of parent or figure out who you are in relation to them. And
mm,
so I see this as somewhat of a grieving process and somewhat of an acceptance process that when your child needs you less, when they become a teenager, when they have more independence, when they'd rather spend time with their friends than spend time with you. It's sad for you. You're losing something. You're gaining a new version of your child, but you're also figuring out who you need to be in this new version of yourself. And so I think that's a big ask for parents or for anyone to say, hey, you have to keep constantly evolving to keep up with this person that you love the most and you want to show up for and be there for. So I think it's hard to learn how to parent. It's hard to learn how to be different versions of yourself as you parent. And there are so many pieces that if you come from a place of woundedness, of, let's say the way you were parented was painful for you, there's often this having to find ways to process and resolve those wounded pieces of you so you're not reacting to your child trying to fix something that your parents hurt in you.
yeah, no, I love that. The reason is because that was a lot of my experience in parenting. So I
Mhm.
grew up in a family. Dad was busy. He started this practice. So he has a family business. And what, came to me after I was through grad school is why I grew up feeling pretty lonely because, I had needs for processing, of feeling connected, of feeling seen, feeling heard, known, those types of things. But everybody's busy all the
Mhm.
time, and so our family looked good, sounded good, and we had this hole, if you would, inside of us. And so my recognition of that happened before I had children, which
Mhm.
seems like a good thing. Um,
Sure.
Started to work on that, as we're supposed to,
Mhm.
and had some healing, and yet at the same time realized now I'm trying to make up for what didn't happen,
Yeah.
and so the younger years, there was a lot of that, when they were my kids were, preschool and early elementary school. But then I started to fall back into some of the ruts that I had learned and growing up, and then I started to lose touch and connection, and while I was paying attention to it, it's kinda nagging at me.
Mhm.
I was going too hard on the piece that was comfortable for me, which was to work,
Yeah.
to please others, to accomplish. And so I fell right back into a similar rut that I'd grown up with, kind of knowing it, but not letting myself really know it. And I think that's what I, would want for parents. And I love what you're talking about is there's this grief and growth process that goes on. And I
Mhm.
didn't let myself early on grieve that I'm losing these little darling sweet beings that I get to just love on. We get to play, we get to be silly, and just loving that part, and 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 then needing to grow into being more of an elementary school conversationalist, which is kind
Yeah.
of where it was difficult for me then as an elementary school student. Well, it
Mhm.
became difficult as an adult to do that as a parent with my children. So I think that's such an important element that you're talking about is that we're both grieving and we're having to grow, and we can get stuck at any juncture.
Yes.
Yeah. So say more.
Yeah, well, and so I think part of what you're speaking to is the parts where you struggled as a child then became the parts that were hard for you as a parent. And I've had some
Yeah.
interesting experiences of that. I'll use myself as an example. So one thing that I realized is that I, as a child, was invalidated very frequently. Like my family did
Mm,
not have the skills to validate. It was very much minimizing, dismissing, there's something wrong with you that you're still upset that your mom isn't here. Why is nobody talking about this? Like it was a big deal to
yeah.
me, understandably. And so, because of that, validation became such a core skill for me as a parent. And I worried so much about invalidating that I overcorrected and it was unhelpful. So, I have a child who had a lot of anxiety, who didn't go to school a
Right.
lot, still doesn't go to school sometimes. And so there would be days where I'd say, well, what if this is the day when they really do have a stomach ache? What if this is the day when I'm forcing them, but it's invalidating them because they really are sick? And so I became more permissive than was helpful for my child. But it came from this place of being so fearful that I would invalidate them and hurt them that I actually didn't hold enough structure to help them move to where they wanted to go. And I learned it in hindsight and was able to repair and correct. But there were some years where my own experience in being parented hindered my ability to show up fully as the best parent that I could be for my child.
Yeah. So fear, could how do you help parents to work with their fear? Because I think parenting is scary.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I see this as really foundational mindfulness skills for parents, the ability to
mm,
notice and name their own emotional experience. Because I think it's easy for any adult to say, get it together, go to school, do the thing, and displace blame back onto the child to do better, behave better, so that I feel okay, so that I'm not scared, so that I'm not worried. But the truth is that if I'm experiencing fear, sadness, guilt, shame, any of those emotions
mm,
as a parent, that I need to notice, what is this that's showing up in me? What is this emotion? What is this sensation? How am I experiencing it? And then name it for the people that support me, not look to my child to do something differently so that I feel better. And I look at that as I call it my circle of support. So when we have a child, they're at the bullseye of a target, they're the center. We are centering our child when we are supporting them. And so we can't look
mm,
inward. We're one of those outer circles supporting them. We can't look inward and say, hey, go to school so that I don't feel dysregulated all day and I'm not worried all day, right? We have to figure out, how do I feel? What's the support that I need? And look outward to our support system in order to regulate ourselves.
That's huge what you're talking about, this idea of a support system for parents. Um,
Hmm.
we didn't make use of that well enough, even though we did teach parenting classes, and the irony in life, uh, and and not listening to what we were talking about. That's, I think, the scary thing for a lot of parents
Hmm.
is, do I want to divulge how I'm struggling? And yet, I think what we know is that when we divulge what we're struggling with, we generally find that other people have similar issues going on, so we're not alone. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we run a parenting group at our center. It's a skills based group, but what happens is it's for parents of teens with self destructive behaviors. And that's not an easy, like, go out to coffee with my friend and chat about it. And there's often this loneliness of, if you have a child with mental health struggles or you are struggling with something that your child is struggling with, it's hard then to hear all the people around you saying, like, Jaden got into college or Kelly's in the lead in the school play, and you're like, my kid's over here just trying to function in the everyday. Like, this is a very
Right.
isolating and lonely feeling. So we have this group to teach parents the skills of validation, reinforcement, behavior change, but they come out the other side saying the most powerful part of it is learning that they're not the only ones that are having this experience and getting to connect with other parents so they feel less alone in those struggles.
Isn't that the lesson of life, though? Is I just love it because we're all looking for that connection to know that we're not different, and yet we all have our uniquenesses. But how are we connecting, and how do we connect? And I'm imagining that parents doing that within a support group in your
Mhm.
system helps them to practice what you're asking them to do with their own young person. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. Being able to accept their emotions, feel vulnerable, communicate, receive feedback. All of those important skills are
right,
experientially baked in, and they're learning other skills to help them do that even better. So it's a really powerful process. And I agree with what you're saying. This, like, common human struggle. We're all unique, but the common human struggle in itself is validation.
yeah. So the other part of your book title is, effective strategies for parenting teens with
Mhm.
self-destructive behaviors. I'm imagining one that the skills can apply to any parent, whether their child has whether they're aware of self-destructive behaviors or not. Would that be true?
That would be accurate. I've had people say it's really relevant to anyone. I mean, the skills in it are understanding and regulating your own emotions, being able to communicate that to others, and rebuilding relationships that are difficult, along with processing your emotions about the parenting journey. So I think a lot of it is just this awareness of emotions, managing emotions, communicating emotions, which are skills that any of us as humans can
Yes.
benefit from, or hopefully are making use of. It's just through the lens of my story of being parented, parenting, and being a teen therapist.
Yeah. That's amazing. And then do you also do family therapy with
I
how do you structure that?
have Yeah, I have some really specific views on family therapy. And so the way that
Nice.
I see it, or the way that we do it at my center, is we bring teens and parents in, and we have a parent integrated program, which doesn't mean that I'm just relaying information that teens share with me to parents or relaying information that parents share with me to teens, is that each part of the system has their own treatment plan and targets. So teenagers are coming in learning how to understand their emotions, have distress tolerance so they're not acting on urges. Parents are coming in learning how to understand their emotions, learn how to respond rather than react, learn how to validate, learn how to reinforce more healthy behaviors at home. So everybody's working on skills. And I
Right.
say that it's an important piece because until each side has the skills to be able to listen, to validate, to take perspective, to respond without conflict, we don't bring them together for so called family therapy. We skill build on each side and then bring them together to be able to skillfully communicate. Because what happens, at least for our acute, high risk, high conflict families, is if we bring them together for those conversations too early, they're simply practicing the same unhelpful behaviors that are playing out at home all the time.
That's great. That that is awesome that you're doing that. We have an intensity model here, and it is so helpful when for a couple if they come individually to begin with, to
Yes.
tap into their own their own trauma, how they learn to cope, the things that then create barriers to intimacy, so that then they can come together and have more productive conversations. Which we're all capable of, but we just get in our way too often.
So it's
Um,
the same idea. It's like helping each person hold their part before they come together.
yeah.
Yeah.
So is it mandatory that parents come in as the teens are doing their work? Is that part of a requirement, the contract that you have?
It is a part of the requirement. So parents are scheduled at structured intervals. For example, their own parent intake. So we'll have an intake with the teen, we'll have an intake with the parent. Parents are involved in the treatment plan review. One thing that happens a lot for teen therapists is that they will find that the teenager wants to work on one thing, but the parent thinks or wants them to work on something else altogether. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
we're bringing everyone together to align on those treatment goals that come from prioritizing safety and prioritizing those bigger important goals and making sure everyone's aware of what we're working on. And then we have these treatment plan checkpoints that include the caregiver as well, where I'm saying, or my therapists are saying, are we making progress towards goals? Does something need to change? What are we doing to get everyone to their goals? At the end of this, we do 6-month treatment plans. As a part of that, we do ask that parents at least minimally commit to our skills group, which is a 12-week parent skills group. And then some parents, we will also strongly recommend their own therapy or parent coaching. But it's if we don't have parents in the process for teenagers, it feels like a table with one of the legs missing, like it's never going to
Right.
stand up the way it needs to. And we explain that to parents, and they usually have buy in the process because they've tried a lot of other things. A lot of them have been to multiple therapists, been in and out of the hospital, so they're ready for something different.
Yeah, and I think the other piece is not feeling like you matter anymore. Your teens seems to have written you off,
Mhm.
in what they're saying and their behaviors. And so this sense of powerlessness, do I really matter and do I have an influence at all? And I think that creates that desperateness as well
Yeah.
yeah.
I think
Go
a lot
ahead.
of times the other side of that is parents that will say, like, my teen doesn't want to be in treatment or doesn't want me involved in therapy. And I think it's that same sense of hopelessness. Like I've tried a bunch before for my parent to understand, and it hasn't worked, or they haven't responded in a way that's been helpful for me before, or what's the point in trying this again? And so to your point of parents feeling like they don't matter, we actually highlight the opposite, is that there's so much support for unilateral change that if a parent can do something differently in the home
Yes.
environment, it actually can shift the whole system if we can hold out long enough for that to happen. And so they
Right.
have a tremendous influence over their child. They can't control them. We can't control anyone, but we can influence how things happen at home if we're willing to do the work.
I am loving this, what you're saying. It's just awesome. And I love that you have put together a system that's supportive of your beliefs around this. That's amazing. So I know you have a couple of places in Pennsylvania. Do you do this work remotely as well? I don't know. I want to ask.
Right now, I am licensed in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Florida, and I have multiple therapists on my team that are also licensed in Pennsylvania and Florida, a few random other places that I won't remember right now.
Right.
And to help support helping teens and parents in other locations, I have a training program for therapists where we teach them our framework, the same one that I use to train my employees, the same ones that I use to train our interns that come into our practice. We will train other therapists and teams in other states so that we can bring this work to them without we can't we can't be licensed everywhere. Maybe we can. Right now, we're not licensed everywhere.
It's
So
probably
we want to
coming.
support, right. We want to support folks in being able to access this work in other places. And that's how we do it.
That's nice. I also have a bias in doing the work in person. It just
Hmm.
is preferred.
I prefer that too.
Yeah. And so you do have a training for therapist
Yes.
that you
I
do. So
actually, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead and say more about that, please.
Oh, I have a book coming out in July. It's called Teen DBT in Practice. And it is first book, You're on Fire, It's Fine, is the framework for parents. That's our parenting program. Teen DBT in Practice is the framework for the full teen and caregiver teen DBT program that we run at our center. So it's the framework for working with high risk families, and it is that's what the training program is based on. So it's up two parts. You can read it, you can engage in the live practice learning version of it, but I really feel passionately about getting this information to as many people as possible because that's how we help people.
Yeah, more is better.
That's my
And so
motto.
yeah, so I think that's a great approach. I love that you're working to share all this. What what would you say to parents, and this is a little different shift, what would you say to parents where their young person seems to have it all together? Because I know you're dealing with the really challenging cases where the behavior's out there, people know what's going on, been some
Mhm.
challenges and stuff. Let's talk to those parents for a moment where their young person seems to be doing okay, if not fantastic. What would you
Yeah.
say to them?
I would say two things. First is that it may be great, so let's not make assumptions. I don't like to assume anything, but I do like to understand what's happening. And so the other side of that is if everything's going perfectly, high expectations, high achievement, there's a loneliness and pressure that comes with that as well, to the point that it may feel like being vulnerable. It may feel like failing. It may feel like not meeting expectations is not okay. And that is also a risk factor for suicidal ideation or depression or high levels of shame, self doubt, and difficulty. So I almost want to say, like, in any extreme, there's going to also be challenge. And when we have high expectations, or have achieved consistently, we therefore place the expectation on ourselves that that is something that we should or need to continue doing. And then that becomes a stressor that could lead to more challenges.
Yeah, which may not actually be instigated by the parent. That can be something that the young person just assumes on their own.
I see that a lot, actually. We have a lot of kids right now who are preparing to go to college. The
Mm,
pressure to get into college is so high, and so many parents are saying, we don't care where they go. We don't care if they go to college. It's pressure they're placing on themselves. It's causing a lot of high levels of stress, depression, a lot of difficulties.
yeah. And then I think I mean, there's so many categories, but the third one that comes to mind for me right now is the quote easy child. The one who just kind of
Mhm.
goes through life, maybe not excelling, maybe, certainly not, struggling. It is I've got the best child. They're just so easy to parent. Um, and what would you say to those parents?
I think I always have multiple viewpoints on things, so I think two things. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
one is, do they have to be the easy kid, right? Like, we see a lot of clients who are sibling of a more difficult, well, quote unquote, more difficult, because that's a judgment, more difficult child, or one who struggles with mental health concerns, or one who has drug and alcohol problems or behavioral issues. And so they've by default become the easy child, and no one has looked at them and said, you be the easy one because the other one is hard. But they've
Right.
internalized that and they've become the easy one. So I would look at that as, within a system, have they had to, by default, become the easy child? And let's look at that and understand their unique and individual needs. And also, I'm speaking to the part when you said, they just kind of move through life, maybe not overachieving, maybe not, doing the most. And I think about parents who pull children through. So we have a
Mm,
young adult program as well, and see young adults who have been accommodated and enabled frequently in their teen years, parents who do homework for, who write letters to get them out of things, who call them out of work, and then all of a sudden they're young adults who don't know how to do life. And so I
right.
would think about that as well, as how are we setting our kids up to be independent, successful, fulfilled, whatever that looks like for them. But, independent adults, we can't do for, we can't assume it's always going to be easy. So how are we scaffolding success for them in the future?
And I think part of what you brought this up, and I didn't call it out at the time, but you mentioned DBT. So if you could describe DBT, because I think that's the answer underneath all this. So
Yeah, DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, is a mode of therapy that balances acceptance and change. So there are two parts as I see it. Is one part is learning how to validate, hold emotions, be with your emotions without reacting to them. And the other part is learning skills to be able to respond to your emotions have better, healthier relationships with others and with yourself, and being able to have a more balanced everyday existence, even when you have ups and downs in your emotions. So there are different parts of the therapy is the individual therapy, the skills group. And we also offer something called phone coaching, which is if in between sessions you're having trouble applying your skills, you can reach out to your therapist and you can have a 5 to 10 minute conversation for them to help you use those skills, like coach you through using them in those hard moments.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yes, because those hard moments do come up.
Well, it's easy to use
Yes.
skills when you're in an office. It's harder when you're in the middle of it.
Yeah, well, I find it hard in both instances. Um,
Absolutely.
this both and mindset I think is really helpful because if I think even about the quote easier child, and I loved your description about how that can play out and what may be underneath that, is we all have this emotional struggle at some level,
Mhm.
and so no matter how capable a young person seems to be, or an adult for that matter, just navigating through life, there's still these struggles. And if we're not kind of called out or brought, encouraged, supported, provided the opportunity to talk about those struggles, I think that's where so many get lost, is not learning the skills of identifying my emotions, um, then bringing up and talking about the emotional experience that I'm having, sitting across from somebody that's actually going to take in and listen without judging, and will
Mhm.
just more work to empathize and understand. Because I actually find young people, when they're tuned into and really listened to, and let them go where they're going to go, is they're pretty wise. They're
For sure.
pretty darn wise, and I'm curious about your experience with that.
Yeah, I would say that so one thing that comes to mind, I was at the grocery store and I was looking at the fresh cut vegetables and I heard across the grocery store somebody yelled, "That's my therapist," and ran over and said hi to me. It was one of my clients from back in the day. And I
I
just
love
think
that.
about as a kid how much I struggled and I once asked my mom later in life like why didn't you ever get me support when I was a kid and she said we just didn't
Yeah,
know, we didn't do that. And so I think we've come such a long way in destigmatizing support seeking, talking about emotions, all genders having permission to have emotions and have these
right.
experiences. And so I do think that teenagers these days come to therapy with a very different mindset. I also think that there's such a nature and nurture element of it, like this predisposition to be able to hold your emotions without them taking over, but also like you said, the environment being able to sit across from you and hear what you have to say non-judgmentally and know how to respond without accidentally even punishing your emotional expression.
Mm, that's a good point. Talk about that a little bit more about that, the accidentally punishing. That's great.
Yeah. Well, so when we have someone who has an emotional experience, it is met in many different ways. So some of those ways could be helpful. The validating experience of, thank you for trusting me, or I can see how much you're hurting, some of these validating responses. But we also have the invalidating responses. And I think for the most part, they're unintentional. The first one is the dismissing and minimizing. You're being too sensitive. In 5 years, this won't matter. You're a teenager. I was
Right,
just joking. Why are you so upset by this? So that's one way that people can respond that invalidates, which can feel punishing or, which can feel like, oh, I'm not going to bring that up again because that didn't feel good for me. The second way is the oversimplifying solution. So this is when we say things like, use that list of coping skills that your therapist gave to you, or go take a walk, or you just need more movement and sunlight. You're not getting enough exercise. That's why you're depressed. And so when we respond with oversimplified solutions, what can happen is that the receiver of that message internalizes there is a simple solution, and yet that's not working for me. So I'm defective. There must be something wrong with me that I can't handle this emotion the same way everyone else
right,
can.
right.
There is a third way, which is only responding to higher level emotional behaviors. I used to work in a psychiatric hospital and I saw this very frequently where teenagers would express that they were depressed or sad or anxious, and parents would respond at first with those dismissive, minimizing responses like, all teenagers are a little moody or hormonal, or I struggled like that when I was a teen. And so teen will increase the communication and behavior around that emotion to something that's more
Yeah.
crisis prone.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden parents hear it and respond to it. And so they learn my needs get met when I'm in crisis, but they don't otherwise get met.
Yeah, it becomes an unintentional training ground to be amplified.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. You have great energy about you. That's I can see
Thanks.
you're a perfect person to be working with young people and their parents. Very engaging. So, is there anything that I haven't asked about or we haven't covered that you would want people to know?
I think the main message summarizing a lot of what we're talking about, for me at least, is that as parents and professionals, we go first, that we need to be able to regulate ourselves, understand and regulate our own emotions so that we can respond effectively to the teenagers that we support. Because how we respond influences how they respond or how willing they are to show up and share again. So that's always my underlying message is as we're looking at decoding behaviors or understanding the message behind behaviors, we have to do that for ourselves first so that we can do that for others.
Absolutely. I'm thinking that some people could make up that regulating means kind of a flat line. Um, so I don't want to end before we talk about that for a minute. So could you talk about what you're saying when you talk about regulating?
That's so interesting. I have heard that once before that regulating had like a negative connotation for them. Whereas for me, so I will clarify because I hear words like manage emotions, control emotions. And for me,
Right.
they feel like not good. They feel like they have a negative connotation. So when I say regulating, what I mean is finding the right balance where I can experience my emotion without it taking over what I'm doing or how I'm acting. I like having my emotions. I
Yes.
I live with my emotions at various levels every day, but I don't want them to take over to the point where they're telling me what to do and I don't feel like I have control. So that's what regulating means to me. It means like finding my balance in them.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's super helpful because it isn't about not having them, it's about having them and be able to work with them. So that's
Exactly.
beautiful.
It's
Um,
like the right dose for you.
exactly, which
Yeah,
which may not be the right dose for another, and then that creates a conversation. So
exactly.
that's the thing with relationships, lots of conversations. So how can people get a hold of you if they want to get a hold of you?
The best place to find all of my work, my brands, my projects is kdkmay.com. So you'll find links to each of my books, to my counseling website, to my training website. So you can find everything in one place at kdkmay.com.
Katie, I really appreciate this. I get super excited about people who are working with young people because it is amazing work to do, and young people need the time. And that you emphasize working with the parents as well is an incredible gift. It's too easy to drop kids off or young people off and say, "Would you handle them?" And then we miss this amazing process of growing with our young people. And
Yeah.
and so it's a beautiful thing that you're doing, and I really hope that both parents, they're listening to this, will ask their therapist to take you up on the training that you
Yeah.
have, because I would love to see more of that happening wherever it is. Um, and for therapists listening to this, to say, okay, this would be a nice add-on to my practice. Because we do know that if you do this kind of work, people are going to be looking to you for help. So it's a really good practice builder, to say the least.
I would agree.
Yeah. So thank you. And nice work. Very nice work.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Take care. Please press the subscribe button, as well as rating and providing a review of our podcast. This helps others to connect with what you have been hearing. If you have any questions, please contact us at themindofatherapist@gmail.com. These questions will be kept anonymous. I want to thank Eric Price for the wonderful music you hear in this podcast. Additionally, this podcast was created to provide accurate and authoritative information on the subject matter. Although we are interviewing licensed therapists, they are not your therapist. This podcast is not intended to serve as direct medical advice and should not be used as a substitute for direct professional help. is given with the understanding that neither the host, publisher, guest, or PCS are rendering legal, medical, or clinical professional information. If you need a professional, we encourage you to find one. Visit Psychology Today to find a licensed clinician near you.